In the world of gaming, interactivity is king. Developers and gamers alike take an immense amount of pride in the fact that our medium is so interactive. And in theory, the possibilities are endless. So why do some games contain a system where they literally just ask you to press a button at a certain time? That's right, I'm talking about QTEs, Quicktime events. And it's a controversial subject. Frankly, a lot of opinions go a lot of different ways on this, so let's just come out and ask it. Today on Game Ranks, let's talk about why QTEs suck. QTEs were essentially popularized by Shenmue, which was a game that came out on the Sega Dreamcast all the way back in the year 2000, at least if you're talking North America. It was 1999 in Japan, which is a game that popularized a lot of concepts that have been gestating over a number of years in the gaming world, like open world and yes, QTEs. Shenmue was not the first to either of these concepts, but it executed them perfectly, at least as perfectly as can be from that time. But if you're really digging for the first QTE games, you can even go all the way back to the 1980s. Some games were made for Laserdisc and were essentially interactive movies. You would have to memorize combinations of buttons and timing and, basically QTEs. In fact, the whole game could be a continuous QTE. A popular one from 1983 that's a very good example of this is called Dragon's Lair. It's certainly not the first, but it is indeed a very good example. But jumping back forward, Shenmue needed QTEs because the game's control scheme didn't necessarily accommodate what Yu Suzuki, the game's creator, wanted to do. In fact, it wasn't possible on account of game controllers and even keyboards are very limited as far as what kind of input is possible. For a very long time, input was limited to button presses. Gamepads didn't have accelerometers, touchpads, and LED tracking, and keyboards frankly still don't. Which begs the question, do all QTEs suck? In fact, Shenmue is a very interesting game and is able to hold my attention and makes me feel pretty good for completing QTEs. On that same coin, Heavy Rain is a great game, and much more recently, Until Dawn is brilliant. Let's be honest, the amount of years that pass in between Shenmue, Heavy Rain, and Until Dawn are quite a few. But why is it so hard for people making QTE games to make one that doesn't suck? Well, first, you're fighting perception. An absolutely massive number of people view QTEs as code for lazy and cheap. First, on the developer side, they couldn't come up with a control configuration that would work with this. And two, on the consumer side, you play QTE games? What are you, some filthy casual? You need to bathe and become hardcore, filthy casual. It costs a lot of money to create systems that can simulate situations believably, at least believably enough. Whereas it's still complex and expensive to animate them, it's just significantly less so. So when something is commonly associated with being lazy or inexpensive, in our culture where we value hard work and also reaping the rewards of hard work, it kind of matters to us. That may not be the best reason to say something sucks, but if I'm going to be completely open, at very least subconsciously that factors into why I don't like it when a QTE pops up. Oh, we couldn't have done this some other way? Especially in the gaming culture where we value grinding and continually working towards a goal. We look at it like, I'm spending time on this, why aren't you? And that's why a game like Until Dawn is such a hard sell. It's just really, really hard to say, yeah, it's a game that's full of QTEs and it's awesome, which that is the absolute truth about Until Dawn. I really enjoyed that game, but relying on some kind of word-of-mouth advertising for something like that, it's like when a first-person adventure game is great. People call it a walking simulator, which if you think about it is a pretty derogatory term, and yet some of them are awesome. It's so hard to tell somebody that it's great. Well, how's the battle system, dude? There isn't one. Oh, well, fuck that. Games that rely on QTEs have a similar problem. And the thing about that is when a mechanic develops a reputation of being lazy, well, to be frank, a lot of lazy game devs get on that train. And they all kind of blow in as quick as they can so they can take advantage of it before hatred of that particular mechanic reaches critical mass, and suddenly gamers and industry insiders are talking about it non-stop. And once it gets to that point, investors don't want to spend the money on games that use that kind of mechanic because it has a reputation, which means money isn't being spent on games like that that are good. I'm not saying that spending money automatically equals making a better game. At the same time, it starts being looked at as a tactic to fill up some space when there isn't enough money to do something where it feels like something is necessary. So games made by people that are actively considering how to make QuickTime events good don't get made, and it's kind of seen as tarred to fill in a pothole where a game doesn't have something, which obviously lowers the overall perception of a QuickTime event, then as time passes continually reinforces this whole cycle. But at the same time, when a game has a great QuickTime event or has a lot of them, it's really satisfying. The best way I can put it is, you know how when you're playing a game or watching a movie and you lean into it? It's like if that mattered. A good QuickTime event feels like a natural reaction to something that's happening on screen. For instance, the combat in the Uncharted and Batman Arkham games. They developed to incorporate QTEs in a way that just feels like, well, a natural extension of what you're doing. The combat isn't fully QuickTime events, they're just brought in to accentuate what's going on and give a little bit more impact, and they succeed at this. Not too far away from that, you have God of War, a game with brutal finishing moves that get incredibly cinematic thanks to the fact that you only need minimal input. And to continue that point, the finishing moves in the Bayonetta games take it even a step further than that, into the ridiculous, but still for whatever reason incredibly immersive because it feels like what you're doing really matters even though it's really minimal action. But to take combat entirely out of the equation, we can easily go back to Shenmue for a load of very interesting sequences that felt as though you were directing the action on screen in a manner that you probably wouldn't have gotten the same kind of guttural reaction from had you not been doing it that way. On the flip side, if I ever have to press F to pay my respects again, F isn't gonna stand for fun. Seriously, F that. Have you ever played The Order 1886? Well, it's possible that you don't understand the nature of full-on disappointment, because that game taught me a new way to feel that emotion. Something that looked like it was going to be extremely interesting and heavily immersive turned out to be a really long sequence of bad QuickTime events. And when I say a really long sequence, I don't mean the game is really long, because there's something like 5 hours total of actual gameplay in it, or maybe that includes the cutscenes. I don't even remember at this point. I shut that game the hell off after a while. But because it kept bombarding me with what seemed like an excuse not to do something. Because the game is a shooting game, whenever you do shooting in a QuickTime event, it feels like you're not being allowed to play the game. And I'll tell you, probably one of the biggest reasons is because a lot of the QuickTime events in that game feel like they could be accomplished by the mechanics of the game. So they don't feel unique, they don't feel like heightened action, they don't feel like they have any impact. They feel like they're impeding you from doing things that you should be able to do, and they shouldn't ever feel that way. It should feel like an extension of the game rather than an obstacle to your progress. Yes, obstacles are in part what gameplay is supposed to consist of, but if we're talking about obstacle in that context, we're talking about something in-world that has to be accomplished. That's not really the context I'm referring to. What we're talking about isn't really impeding a character from accomplishing a goal, but rather impeding a player from enjoying the game. Which is bad because I think most people generally spend their hard-earned money to play video games because they want to have some degree of fun. At least most of us. I mean, I'm sure there's somebody who buys games to get frustrated and hate themselves and go through this weird cycle of why do I do this, what am I here for? But I'm not that into existential crisis myself. So why do QuickTime events suck? To sum it all up, it's because QuickTime events suck. I know that sounds dumb, but if more time and money was spent on QuickTime events, developing them as a gameplay mechanic, and more developers felt confident in trying to push it into a realm where it was actually good, then maybe it wouldn't feel like such a ripoff to those of us playing the games. Basically, I'm saying if it doesn't warrant a QuickTime event, don't do it. Only do it if it's like, that would be great here, and you spend the time implementing it. Just make them good, please. I think we can all get behind that. What are the worst QuickTime events you can possibly think of? Let's talk about that in the comments section, because I have a feeling you, as much as I, have some serious opinions to share on that. And also, if you're not subscribed, this is a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every single day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video, and we will see you next time here on GameRanks.